Well, hello there again, and welcome once more to the Apartment Building Wealth Generation System. We are now in module number 6. We're getting close to the end of the 7-module online training program, so we're getting into some really heavy meat of the program here. So this is something you'll probably want to go through 2 or 3 times. We've already talked about why the apartment buildings, what to buy, where to buy. We've talked a little bit high level about how do I buy, as well as getting into analyzing the deal and the 4 different perspectives that you want to take a look at that real deal. So in this module, we're going to talk about making the actual offer and looking at it the conventional way, and then from my perspective, doing it my way. And then we'll wrap things up in module number 7 with now that you own it. You've got this transition year. What are you going to do with it? How are you going to manage that with a property management section as well? We left off in Module 5 with some homework to play with the analyzer and get comfortable. It's extremely important you become very comfortable and knowledgeable with this analyzer so that you can quickly, easily identify what's a good deal. You can see by looking at the numbers what needs to happen in order to make it a good deal, or just simply realize that this is not a good deal and be able to walk away from it. So select one. We were to select one property from last week's homework assignment, analyze it based upon the numbers provided, then based upon what you feel was missing as well. And then the results are property analysis based upon the numbers provided. Those are the numbers that the realtor or the seller provided you initially through the marketing process. And then the property analysis based upon the missing numbers, and tell me what it is worth to you. So please feel free to email me with your results and or questions. All right, so in module number 6, it doesn't look like it's much content here, but there's a lot of information to cover. We're going to start off by looking at the steps to making an offer and go through the conventional way that people make the offer. And then I will share with you how I make my offers. Also share a little bit of insight about negotiating as well. So when the offer is being made, it depends who is making the offer, who is representing you when you're making the offer. From a non-educated perspective, meaning that is just somebody who has very little understanding and knowledge about actually investing in good quality investment properties. This is the process. They go out, they find a deal, then they'll go and visit the property, view the deal, and they'll ask for all of the details, including the financials at that point in time, as part of their process in determining whether it looks of interest to them or not. Then they'll review it and analyze the deal. They'll most likely discuss the deal with friends, family, whoever they have in their life that they feel comfortable with. And then they'll decide to make an offer, and more often than not, their offer will come in as what we call a low-ball offer. They're going to buy the property thinking they have a great deal, only to discover that there's a lot of hidden or unknown expenses that have not been disclosed to them, and the cash flow is going to be less than expected if there's any positive cash flow at all. Unfortunately, I see this happen a lot with non-educated investors who are also using either non-educated realtors, non-educated with the respect of they don't really understand all the nuances of an investment property, or it could be a real estate investor who doesn't really care about finding out all of this information for their client. They're just looking at their bottom line, which is the commission check that they will receive from the sale. Unfortunately, well, definitely not everybody, not every real estate agent operates this way. It's only a few of them, but unfortunately there are a few out there like that. Then we've got making the offer, still a conventional way, but this is a real estate educated individual. So somebody who has taken some courses, they may already own a few properties as well, and this is the process that I see them going through. So they locate all of the available deals, and they make offers on them all. So there will be a more aggressive approach here. So what they'll do is they will make multiple offers on the same property, or they'll make multiple offers on many properties as well. They will make lowball offers, and they use the shotgun approach where they'll make many offers, lowball offers, and with the anticipation that 1 out of 10 will get accepted and they'll move forward. They'll have an exorbitant number of terms and conditions that most sellers will have never seen before or have been exposed to before. They'll also try and include some very creative clauses with cashback or no money down. A lot of these people have been taught, like myself, have been taught how to do cashback creatively, how to do deals with no money down if you don't have any cash to get invested, to get started in investing, how to do these deals creatively. And they're all legit. They're all legit strategies. It's just how they're actually implemented or applied, which makes a big difference. VTB clauses as another one example, or extremely small deposits. And the list goes on and on for these types of individuals. Now, I learned my lesson here because, as I mentioned, I'm aware of these no money down deals, VTBs, all these creative transactions. And I think I have an unfair advantage in that I am a licensed real estate broker, actually. So I understand both sides of the game here. I understand where the listing agent is coming from, and I also have been selling properties, so I've been approached by some very creative real estate investors who are trying to do deals with me as well. So I've been on both sides of the fence. And where this really hit home with me was when I was buying this one particular property. It was a collection of 54 townhomes for $2.4 million. And I made an offer on this property, and I was using a lot of the creative. At this time, I was not a licensed realtor. I had been a licensed realtor prior, and I obtained my license again since this. But during this time period, I did not have my real estate license, but I still understood from their perspective. So I made this offer based upon the real estate education that I had been taught as an investor, using some creative clauses, and I can't remember all the details of it now. And I made the offer, submitted it, and then I never heard anything back. And which is unusual because by law, they are obliged to submit the offer, regardless of the terms and conditions in the offer, to the seller and at least respond back. But they didn't even respond back to me. So this particular property was located about 2 hours from our home, and we were going on a road trip, and we were going to be driving past this community. So we thought, well, we'll stop into the real estate office and find out what's going on with our offer. I went in there, and I learned some of the most important lessons I could ever have learned. It was very humbling and humiliating at the time, but the lessons I learned helped me become a much more successful realtor moving forward. The listing agent was borderline rude to us and condescending, and some of the things he said, he had no right saying. However, and he still was obliged to present the offer. But that aside, what I took away from it was some very important insight, because he made the comment that I can always tell when these scam real estate courses go through town. Those were his words. Because in his opinion, he didn't think these real estate education courses were very legitimate. And they were a lot of U.S. real estate mindset techniques coming into Canada, which in some cases they were. However, everything that was being taught was legitimate, legal, above board, and applicable in Canada. It's just that here in Canada, the agents and the sellers were not as exposed or experienced with these types of strategies. And he says every time a course or a program is offered, what we get is hundreds of these types of offers flooding our desk, and they're all these creative offers that they want the property for next to nothing with no money down, and they don't want to put a deposit down, and they never go anywhere, and it's not worth our while, so we just throw them in the trash. Well, again, I can't stress enough that legally they're not allowed to throw them in the trash. However, that was their mindset, and that's what I was up against. So I was a bit flabbergasted with this response, but then I got thinking about it and realized that he's right. I mean, I've been on the other side of the fence where I've been receiving offers on behalf of sellers. And if you get all of these very creative deals and you're trying to, well, first of all, it's not just one or two. You get you get many offers coming in, and you have to deal with them all, and they're all very similar because they're using the same techniques and strategies. And you try and present this to the seller. The seller's going to get really annoyed, and what the seller can do is direct the agent so that if any similar type of offers come in, just reject them outright. Don't present them to me. And I suspect that may have been the case here. So what I realized was if I want my offer to be accepted, I need to learn to play the game the way the agents and the sellers are accustomed to playing the game. And that would differentiate me from the rest of the crowd. So that's exactly what I did, and that's how I have come up with my strategy, which I will share with you here shortly. The other thing you need to realize is that with respect to realtors, there's two different types of realtors. There's your residential realtor and your commercial realtor. And the residential realtor is comprised of experienced and non-experienced, and they deal with 95% of the transactions across the country. And these transactions are primarily single-family homes. So when you get into the commercial, it's a much smaller market, far fewer properties, deals being transacted in comparison to residential properties. They only make up about 5% of the business. The commercial agents typically are more experienced. They take different courses, different programs in order to get their commercial designation. So there's a very big difference between those two types of agents. And then with deals, small deals, I'm going to say 4 units and less. In the eyes of the lenders, those are deemed to be residential mortgages, and a lot of residential agents will feel qualified enough to be able to facilitate those transactions. However, it's still a rental property. It's still a commercial property. The value for these properties is not determined the same way the value is determined for a single family residence. So not all residential agents are qualified or should be qualified to do these small deals, yet that is a potential that you need to be aware of. Once you get into the bigger deals, 30 units and plus, you're typically dealing with a commercial agent, and you can expect a different level of professionalism and a different level of, maybe professionalism is not the right word, but you're going to see the difference between the commercial and the residential agent just simply because it's a different product that they are selling as well. Okay, so on a high level, here are the steps of doing it my way. First thing I do is determine the real value, and the only way I can do this initially is based upon the numbers that are provided. I will then insert the what I believe are missing numbers, and I will come up with a value based upon what I believe the numbers should be. This will then allow me to determine the price that I want to pay, the maximum amount that I'm prepared to pay for that property. So you know what it is worth, but how much are you willing to pay? So those can be two different values as well. Then what I do is I make an offer based upon very light negotiations. I determine the price the seller is willing to sell for the property initially, and I use conventional terms and conditions. Even if I want to ask for a vendor take-back, I will ask for the vendor take-back during my light initial negotiations. I do not want to spook them. I don't want to scare them off. I want to keep everything as conventional and attractive to the seller as possible. Once I have an accepted conditional offer, the offer is going to be conditional upon the usual conditions such as finance, inspection, document review, lawyer's review, and initial viewing. Then I will go through my diligence process where I will trust but verify all documents. So I want to see, this will allow me to get control or understanding of the true numbers attached to that building. You know, what are the actual expenses, what are the actual revenues, etc. I'll also inspect the property with a proper inspection team and not just the local single-family residential home inspector. I'll get proper inspectors in there, and it'll be multiple inspectors as well. So I will have a building inspection done, an overall building inspection, which, you know, checks all of the elements of the building, you know, including the individual units. I will also get the roof inspected. I will get the HVAC inspected, which includes the furnaces, and most likely there will be an environmental inspection as well. Once these inspections are done and I've reviewed all the numbers, that's when I identify the issues, and I can then go back and renegotiate for compensation, or I will identify the fact that the property really isn't worth what they think it's worth because they gave inaccurate numbers, and go back and renegotiate based upon the true value. The results of this will determine whether you waive the conditions or walk, but you have to be willing to walk away from the deal, you know, just by saying nope, not interested, or if it looks like a good deal, then waive the conditions and move forward. So before I get into the details of each of those steps, I just want to talk a little bit about the psychology of this, and there is definitely a psychology to making your offer, how to make it, how to go through the entire process. One of the key things you need to remember is the best way to get rich is to learn how to solve other people's problems. Because in most cases, people are selling these properties because they have a challenge. Their challenge could be health related, their challenge could be family related, it could be business related, it could be age related. It could be that they want to sell the property and just downsize and enjoy the cash flow in their retirement. You need to create a relationship, and the relationship, you know, starts at the very beginning and it continues through the entire process. I'll get into that in a little bit more. So relationships, you want relationships with everybody involved. So you want to be able to create a relationship with the selling agent and the owner of the property, the seller. Try and find out why they are selling, the real reason, not the reason that the agent always is going to tell you that, oh, they just want to get rid of the property and start traveling. Well, there's usually more to that. You know, why do they want to start traveling? That's when you find out that the spouse has developed a terminal disease and they want to spend more quality time together, which means getting rid of all their properties so they can travel the world over the next year. Well, that's a very different reason than simply saying they just want to travel. What are they going to be doing next? If it's a senior individual who wants to divest themselves of their portfolio so they can enjoy retirement, well, what are they going to do for cash flow? Where are they going to invest their money? Maybe you can help them by structuring a deal so that they still get cash flow. So these are all things that are extremely important for you to learn and understand so that you can approach them in the right way and structure the deal in a way that's going to be most appealing to them as well. Meeting the owner is extremely important, but it's also a challenge because most real estate agents will discourage you from meeting the owner, the selling agents. The real estate agents have a fear that you will go behind their back, you'll do something unethical, illegal, you'll cut them out of the transaction, they'll lose control. It's usually from a mindset of fear that the selling agent will try and prevent you from connecting with the owner. Now, if the owner absolutely does not want to meet anyone, then there's not a whole lot you can do, but there are ways to get around that. So you can ask to meet the owner under the pretense that you want to understand the building better. You would like to do a walkthrough with the owner and have an opportunity to see all the little nuances of the building that only the owner is going to know about. Yet the real reason for this is to try and build a relationship with the seller. Understand what is really motivating the seller. Create a relationship where they like you. Identify their problem, solve their problem, have them like you so that they'll want to sell to you, and they may even be a little bit more flexible in order to sell to you. And if a challenge becomes evident, they're more likely to work with you in resolving that challenge. Plus, in a lot of cases, investors, when they're divesting and selling, they're looking at selling more than just the one property. Many investors have multiple properties, and they're going to be looking to sell those properties as well. And perhaps this will give you the opportunity to create a relationship where you can then buy the remaining properties privately. All right, so let's go through the steps in more detail. So as I mentioned, you're going to base your initial value upon the numbers that have been provided to you, plus numbers that you feel are missing. And as I've mentioned earlier in the other modules, you now understand how the value of a property can be manipulated by either inflating the revenue or removing some of the expenses and reducing the total expenses related to that property. Either way, that's going to artificially inflate the value of that building. However, you don't have those real numbers yet. And the mistake that most investors make is that they want those real numbers before they actually make an offer. Well, what happens is, while you're asking for all those numbers, which you may or may not get, people like myself are going to make an offer based upon the numbers that have been provided, plus the numbers that I feel are missing. And we're going to get that property tied up so that you don't have an opportunity, even if you wanted to after the fact. So here we have the snapshot of the analyzer that we used in the previous example of the property in Fort Saskatchewan. And we used the numbers that they had provided us in their pro forma. And you can see the market value in the top left here is very close to what the asking price is. So a uneducated or less educated investor is going to take a look at this. They're going to see, wow, this looks like a pretty good deal. There's excellent cash flow. The return is pretty good as well. About a 10% cash on cash return. And what they don't realize is that there's some numbers missing. So how do I know there's numbers missing? Well, down at the bottom of that total expense page, I just highlighted the number 28%. I know for a fact that that number should be closer to 40%, and it could be as high as 50% in some cases. If it's closer to 40%, then that's going to greatly reduce either the income or increase the expenses, but the bottom line is our net operating income is going to be much lower. So when we get the total expenses up to approximately 40%, here I've got them at 39%, you can see that our cash flow has dropped significantly. Our cash on cash return is down to almost zero, and the market value is now down to $1.2 million. That's a significant drop. That's $300,000 drop in valuation. So what I now have to do is figure out, okay, well, what is the maximum I'm prepared to pay for this property? So I'm going to leave my total expenses where I believe they should be, and then I'm going to start to play with the purchase price, and I will bring the purchase price down from the asking price of 1.588 until I get to the point that I'm happy with the returns. So over on the right-hand side, you'll see that I've got a cash-on-cash return of 5%. It's not fantastic, but when I factor in the principal pay down and a 5% growth, it comes up to 48%, which is close to my acceptable threshold. These are my parameters, though, not yours. You have to decide what works for you. So in this particular case, I have decided that the most I am prepared to pay for this property is going to be $1.4 million. I obviously want to get it for less than that, but that's my absolute cutoff point. If we can't get it for 1.4 or less, I'm walking away from it. So this is the price range that I'm looking at. 1.4 is the highest price I'm going to pay. The real value I know is down around 1.2. The asking price at 1.588. So the acceptable price range is between the 1.2 and the 1.4 million dollars. So now we actually make the offer. But what price will they initially accept? Well, I think we can all agree that they're never going to accept what the true value is. The $1.2 million, they're not going to accept that because in their mind, they truly believe that the property is worth their initial asking price. So your maximum amount you feel it's worth, they're likely not even going to accept that at 1.4 million. That's just too low. So what price are they likely to accept? Well, there's a lot of different things that are going to come into play here. So it depends on the market activity. If it's a slow market, then they're going to be more open to lower offers. If it's been on the market for 4 months already and they haven't had any offers, then they're going to be more motivated to entertain anything at all. Also, the uniqueness of the property. The more unique it is, the more likely they're going to have to be flexible in the price. If you start throwing in terms, vendor take-back, cash-back, inclusions, etc., that's going to make it more of a challenge to be accepted. But in reality, it's likely that they're going to accept no more than 10% below their asking price. So that's 1.45, but it's probably going to be in the 1.5, the low 1.52, in that range. That's exactly where they're going to most likely agree and accept at this point in time. So then it comes down to deposit. Again, a lot of the educated real estate investors have been taught that you put as little down as possible because we're also being taught that you're going to be making multiple offers on many different properties and you only have so many dollars to be putting down for deposits and having them tied up. So they'll try and get you to put down $500 or $5,000 on $1 million or a $2 million property. Well, $500 simply is not going to cut it. Is it legal? $1 is legal. But here's the problem. Again, it comes down to the psychology of the seller and the real estate agents involved as well. So whether it be $1 or $500 or $50,000, that is all legal. But the smaller the deposit, what you're saying is, I'm not serious about this. The bigger the deposit, they construe that to mean that you are more serious, you're a big player. So again, what's the whole goal here? The goal is to get your offer accepted initially. So that means don't go in with a low ball offer and don't go in with an extremely small deposit. Now, I too like to go in with small deposits, but on this $1.5 million property, I wouldn't go in with a $500 deposit. I would probably go in with a $10,000 initial deposit, and I know that that's not going to cut it for them. I know they're going to come back and probably want a $50,000 deposit. So what I will do is I'll start off with this small deposit, and then once they counter back, I'll say, well, that's fine. I'll give you the $10,000 now, and I'll give you an additional $40,000 or even more. If they want 50, I might give them 75. So I'll say, here's my initial 10,000, plus I'll give you another 65 upon the removal or satisfaction of all the conditions within the agreement. Now, the silly thing is, I'm still getting my $10,000 deposit down. I don't have to put any more money up front until I'm committed to buying that property. Once I've committed to buying it, I'm going to have to come up with the money anyway, so it's no big deal in my mind. But to them, I'm a more serious player now. Closing dates that you want to choose as well. You want to choose the first week of the month, not the first of the month. So you want to go 3 or 4 days into the month, and anywhere within that following week is where you would like to close. The reason being is that there is a huge rental adjustment period here. So the seller, the original seller, will have to collect the rents for the month that you're closing in. So let's say that we're closing in the month of June here. On the 1st of June, he collects all the rents, puts them in his bank deposit. You're going to close on the 5th or the 6th. The lawyers will calculate how much rent the seller gets to keep and how much rent should come over to the new buyer. And this will be calculated by the lawyers, and then it will be included in a statement of adjustments. And what that means is, let's say the balance of the rent owing to you is $10,000, and you have to come up with another $100,000 at closing. Well, instead of coming up with $100,000, you'll only have to come up with $90,000 now. Terms and conditions during your light negotiation period, you want to keep them pretty straightforward. You want to be able to make your agent feel more comfortable. So also, when I do my own offers, quite often I will create my own clauses. And sometimes, if I'm not a licensed realtor and I'm just buying it as a private individual, then I'll even use my own purchase and sale contract. Now, if I have a realtor representing me, the realtor might say, well, no, sorry, I have to use my contracts. Well, if you're allowing your agent to write the offer, then yes, they have to use their contracts that are approved by whatever board they're licensed under. However, if you present to your agent an offer that you have created, then they have to legally submit that offer, even though it's not on their approved paperwork. And when it goes to the listing side, the seller's side, they have to accept that as a legal binding contract and submit it to the seller for review as well. The challenge here is that when you try and force your paperwork, your clauses into the equation, you automatically will get some pushback, not only from your agent potentially, but definitely from the other agent as well. So I would suggest you try and use the conventional approved clauses if and when possible, as long as the legal intent is still going to meet and satisfy what it is your contract was trying to achieve. So be aware of that. Try and keep things as normal as possible so that you're not raising any red flags. What you're going to also ask now is for a list of documents, and in most real estate jurisdictions they have standard clauses that will satisfy this request, but what you're looking for is a profit and loss statement, especially if it's a small-time investor who only owns one building. They've owned it for a long time. What you want to do is you want the profit and loss statement for the past 24 months. You may also ask for their statements, tax filing statements. You're not asking for their personal tax files. You're just asking for the statement portion related to the property. And this will help you better understand what they have been running through, the accountant for tax purposes and whatnot. It'll give you a more realistic picture of the overall property. You also want a list of all of the equipment, fixtures, and chattels that are included in the purchase price with the property. So if you're buying a 12-unit building, there could be 12 refrigerators, 12 electric stoves. There could be a washer and dryer, a coin-operated washer and dryer. You want a list of all of these chattels. You want a copy of all the service contracts, both orally and written. So you want to know who you may or may not be committed to moving forward. You want to get a rent roll showing the present names of all the tenants, when they moved in, their anniversary dates, not their wedding anniversary, but their turnover dates, like when they moved in, when they move out. A list of the rent increases or any notices or evictions that are in their files as well. You want a rental arrears report, which is going to show who's currently owing rent, as well as a list of all of the last month's rents that have been collected as well. You need a copy of the tenancy agreements, and you're going to need this for the lending. The lender's going to ask for it. Employment contracts, if you've got any employers working at the property, or any written or oral agreements. Ask for a survey of the property showing all the improvements presently located on the real estate property, on the real property rather. They may have an outdated survey. Quite often they'll stroke that out and say not applicable, not available rather. You want copies of all liens, charges, easements, covenants, and restrictions which run with the land. Now your lawyer will discover this when they do their title search. However, it would be nice to know what all of these are prior to your lawyer doing their title search, because quite often the title search takes place shortly before closing. And they do it shortly before closing because that lessens the chance of anything new being registered against the property between the time they actually do their search and the time you actually take control of the property. But if you have removed your other conditions and then you discover that there is an issue with a lien or an easement that you're not comfortable with, then that could be a challenge. You want copies of all of the utility bills, the hydro, like the electric bills, the gas bills, the water and sewer bills, etc. And you need those at least minimum for 1 full year prior to this offer date, preferably 2 years, so you can see what the trends are. If there's water boilers, you may need to have a boiler inspection or an elevator inspection if there's elevators, etc. You would ask for copies of all past environmental and building inspection reports pertaining to the property. That may be in their possession. They may strike that out, and if they do, if they say they don't have any, that's one thing. If they had them but they don't want to share them, then what's in there that they don't want you to see? All fire code retrofit work needs to be completed and approved by the fire marshal as well. Continue on with the terms and conditions. This is another big thing that I do differently than most people. And again, this is pretty common when you get into the larger commercial properties. Definitely not so common with smaller properties, single family homes, duplexes, triplexes. But I will make my offer based upon the numbers that have been provided and based upon the numbers I think should be in there. I will view the property before spending dollars, usually within a short time after acceptance. So what happens here is I may not even actually go and see the property. If it's close by, I might take a drive by. I might do a Google search, because you can do the Google Drive on these now, which is certainly nice. But I won't go visit the property. I won't go do a walkthrough or anything. I will make an offer based upon the numbers, because the bottom line is, if I can't get an acceptable offer, then why waste my time? Why waste the realtor's time? And why disrupt the tenants by going and viewing the property? So I will make my offer first, get it under contract. I'll have a clause in there that it's subject to the viewing of the property and acceptance of the property after my viewing within 3 to 5 days. What this also does is it gives me a huge advantage over most other people interested in that property, because very few people will structure their deals this way. Most people go back to the conventional way I mentioned earlier, where they will ask for all of this information ahead of time in the hopes that they'll get it and review it and analyze it again and again and again before they make their actual offer. And or they may simply make an offer, but they'll go and at least view the property first. And they'll take a walk through and decide, yeah, I like it, whatever. But in the meantime, while they're spending all that extra time thinking about it and analyzing it, I have made the offer subject to viewing the property within 3 to 5 days. If I view the property and it doesn't fit my, my portfolio, I just don't like it, or I discover some major issue that was not evident in the listing agreement, then I can simply walk away from it, and I haven't wasted anybody's time other than a little bit of time with the agent and the seller reviewing and negotiating the deal. Inspection clause, the offer to purchase is conditional for X number of days after acceptance upon the buyer or its agents conducting physical inspections. In a lot of cases, you'll see that it's singular. They'll say physical inspection. I make mine plural. And it's you must be satisfied in your sole and absolute discretion with the results of the inspection, and the buyer must provide access, or the seller must provide access to the buyer and or his agents at all reasonable time in order for the inspections to be carried out. This allows you to bring in not only your building inspector, but you can bring in the HVAC inspection. If you've got an elevator, you can bring in that inspector as well. So it gives you that opportunity. Financing, conditional upon X number of days upon the buyer or agent obtaining at the buyer's expense mortgage financing satisfactory to himself. Again, it is a standard clause. This is a clause that's not going to raise anybody's eyebrow. They're accustomed to seeing this. This is what they're expecting. And you can work with this, and you can ask for extensions after the fact as well. Lawyer's approval, this is a pretty standard one, but don't be surprised if it gets removed. Now, if it gets removed, you can still submit your accepted offer to the lawyer for his approval or feedback. It just means you cannot walk away from the deal because of the lawyer's disapproval. But does all of a sudden you can't get financing, or all of a sudden you're not happy with the building inspection. So there's always multiple ways to exit. You want to confirm all of the utility bills are accounted for and that they are accurate, and everything's being disclosed the way they were. You want to inspect each and every unit. I bought one particular building where we tried multiple times to get into a unit. There was always a good excuse why we couldn't get into that one unit. Turns out there was a small kitchen fire that hadn't been replaced, and I trusted the seller, and as a result, ended up getting burnt, no pun intended there, but it cost me about $8,000 to repair that unit after I bought it. You also want to talk with as many tenants as possible. Keeping in mind what the tenants are, a lot of tenants love to bash the landlords and play the victim role. However, it's a good opportunity while you're doing your inspections of the property, while the inspector is doing their actual inspection, you make small talk with the tenant. Ask how long they've been there, how much they're paying rent, are they happy with the building overall, are they happy with the management, are there any issues that you've been trying to get rectified, etc. And again, you're just making small talk, and it'll give you a lot of insight that you wouldn't normally get from the other agent. Also interview the tradespeople. Find out who the handyman is, who's the carpet installer, where they get their appliances, etc. Especially with the handyman, if they're accustomed to the building already, they're good quality work and they're reliable, then you're going to want to keep them on. But if you, during the course of talking to them, oh yeah, the landlord, this happened to me in one of the buildings. I was talking to the handyman person, and he said, well, the owner of this property uses nothing but the cheapest material. You'll notice in the kitchen that there could be 3 or 4 layers of vinyl flooring. He never pulls up the old vinyl flooring. He just puts it over top of the existing, which means that your new vinyl flooring is not going to last very long at all. But it was the cheapest way of doing things. So that gives you some additional insight in the property as well. When you're doing your inspection, make sure that you're using a good, qualified, experienced inspector who knows their stuff. You're not just looking at the superficial or cosmetic, all the carpets, flooring, paint, and appliances, that's all good and fine. But the more important part is the structural and or the expensive components. Things like the roof, the exterior envelope, including the condition of the walls and the windows. The balconies is a huge one. If there are balconies on that property, really look at those balconies with a fine-tooth comb. Try and, you're limited as to what you can do, but a good inspector will have access to some equipment that will allow them to see through the walls, see the condition of the infrastructure in behind the walls. You might be allowed to drill a small hole where you can put a camera into an enclosed area. Moisture meters are a big popular tool as well. So your inspector should have all of these tools to help them do a truly good quality inspection. If you got furnaces, boilers, don't rely on your home inspector. Bring in an expert to take a look at those. Take a close look at the drainage of the property, etc. Issues, not all issues are going to be obvious to you during your initial walkthrough. However, some issues are going to be obvious. So for example, if you walk into the building and you see this big old inefficient furnace top center wrapped in asbestos, you know that that's going to be an issue, but you don't say anything. You don't let on that that is a potential issue. When you go up on the roof to take a look at the roof and you see that it's tar and gravel and there's bare spots, but you've been assured that the roof's in good condition, now is not the time to challenge that. You leave these issues till later after you have the physical inspection of the property done by professionals. So that's when you're able to go back and renegotiate after the fact. And you can go back for a variety of different reasons. So if they haven't provided you full disclosure or accuracy with respect to the expenses, or there's missing expenses, or some of the rents, they may have provided you rents, potential rents rather than actual rents. They may claim that there's only 1% vacancy, but you see over the past 2 years, the vacancy actually averaged out at 3%. They might be using a false cap rate because cap rates have a range. So they might use the cap rate at the lower range. So these are all things that can affect the value of the property and allow you to renegotiate the value of that property as well. So with respect to, I mentioned in the previous slide there, identifying an old furnace, I know for a fact that one of the first things I would be wanting to replace is that old furnace, because if your heating costs were $15,000 and you replace it with a brand new furnace, then you're going to have a minimum of $5,000 a year savings. So you may have to spend $20,000 or whatever to replace that furnace, but if you can save $5,000 a year, it doesn't take long for it to pay for the furnace. It also increases the value of that property immediately, the day that you do the work. So if you can decrease your expenses by $5,000, you're increasing your net operating income by $5,000 as well. That $5,000, when you take that into consideration a 7% cap rate, that increases the value of that property by $71,400. That's called instant equity. That's one of the most beautiful profit centers when you're buying real estate. There's different strategies. In my case, I prefer to have the seller replace that furnace prior to me taking it over. So we might negotiate. I'll identify that the furnace is old and inefficient, needs to be replaced. That's going to bring the value of the building down. So we might negotiate a reduction in the price. Or better yet, I would rather negotiate that he replace that furnace and we leave the price of the purchase where it is. All right, little reality check here. So our goal is to achieve an acceptable price at or below your highest acceptable price, knowing that your success in achieving this goal will be dependent upon your ability to convince the seller and the agents involved of the true value and then provide a good reason to sell it to you. Here's the challenge though. You've got uneducated investors willing to pay above value price, plus large investors willing to overpay for properties to park their money. So it's very difficult for you to go to the seller and say, Mr. or Mrs. Seller, I really want your property. However, based upon my analysis, and I'm going to share my analysis with you, the true value of this property is only $1.2 million. And they'll say, well, I understand what you're saying and I can't disagree with you, but the reality is there's other people who are willing to pay more for it and I'm going to accept their offers. And these other people who are willing to pay more for it are the uneducated investors who don't understand what they're really getting into, or they're the big players in the game, the people like the insurance companies, the pension funds, who are simply looking for places to park their money. They're not looking for cash flow necessarily. They're just looking for good safe havens for their money. So now it's decision time. You need to check your emotions at the door and remain focused on the numbers and consider all of your options moving forward using the sound logic, looking at all the options such as, well, is there potential to increase the rents? If so, how much can I increase them and what's the effect going to be? Can I decrease the vacancies by better property management? What's the reason for the vacancies being so high? If I can decrease my vacancies, that's going to increase my income, therefore increase the value. Is there some way I can reduce the expenses? Can I do my own property management? Can I get a better insurance quote? Can I use better quality handyman services, and or can I outsource, get a better source for some of the materials that they're buying and reduce the expenses by 10%? If it's a condominium, what is coming down the road? Am I looking at a cash call in the next 2 or 3 years? Is there severance potential here? Are you actually, going back to the condominiums, am I able to take this building and turn it from a rental property into a condominium where I can sell 1 or 2 or multiple units to offset the high cost? Can I sever a piece of land off? Can I change the use of the building, or can I change the use of the adjacent land? Could I've got land next door, I could build another building on it, or I could build a small strip mall on it. You have to look at all of the options to determine what is this property really worth for you, and are you willing to pay more than what you feel it's worth, or are you going to stick to your guns and only pay what you truly believe it's worth? You should always have a minimum of 3 exit strategies. So if you buy this property, one strategy could be that you simply sell it, or you bring in more partners, more capital. If you deem it to feel that there's a little bit of too much risk, you can share the risk of buying this property. So you could say, Mr. Seller, I'm willing to give you what you feel that property is worth, even though I don't believe it's worth that full amount. However, what I'm going to do, you claim that you've got a 1% vacancy. Well, how about I'll pay you the full amount, but if the vacancy turns out to be 5%, then I'm going to reduce the purchase price by X number of dollars. Or we'll do a vendor take-back mortgage, and if I discover that over the course of the year, the numbers that you've actually claimed and can't substantiate, if they don't come to fruition, then this vendor take-back mortgage is going to be adjusted accordingly. So there's all kinds of ways that you can structure some conditions into it. Also, when you're doing your analysis of the property and you're doing your calculations, add in some extra expenses, some extra margin. Maybe you put all of your expenses up by an additional 5 or 10% just to cover the unknowns. So now you have to decide, are you moving forward or not? So are you going to waive the notice of fulfillment? So each subject, such as the finance clause, the inspection clause, each of those subjects will require an acknowledgement from you that you are moving forward or not. So once you have satisfied your inspection, you can then provide a notice of fulfillment for that particular clause. Do not allow the listing agent or the selling agent to word the clauses in such a way that if the time expires, then you have acknowledged and agreed that that condition has been fulfilled. You want your conditions to be filled with a notice of fulfillment signed by yourself. You don't ever want to get into a situation where you accidentally remove a condition and potentially end up with a property that you really, in the bottom line, is you don't want. Always make it subject to you providing a notice of waiver or fulfillment so that you keep that control in your hands. Be prepared to simply stop and walk away should you decide not to pursue the deal. What you do is you ask for a mutual release, which the seller will then sign and say that we release you from this contract that we've entered into. Your deposit will then be returned to you, and you move on and keep looking for other opportunities. You have to realize now you're playing in a different sandbox here. It's in this particular sandbox, you are going to have to spend some money during your due diligence time period, and you could, depending on the size of the deal, you could have invested $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, and in the end walk away from the deal and you've lost $5,000. Sometimes it's better to lose that $5,000 than to get into a deal that's going to cost you $50,000 because you missed something. So be prepared for that. Understand that that's what you have to do to play in this particular sandbox. All right, so your homework for this module is to actually make an offer. If you have a potential deal, then go ahead and make an offer, knowing that you've got these escape clauses such as your finance inspection, your lawyer, etc., that you can get out of. But you can go through the negotiation process, the actual creation, the submission of the offer, the negotiations of the offer, and then you get the opportunity for a couple weeks, 3 weeks, whatever your time period is, to do your due diligence on that property, and you're still not committed to it, but you've got the option to purchase it. You now have it under control. If there's no deal to be had, no deal to make an offer on, then work with an agent and do up a mock offer. When I was operating a brand new brokerage, what I would do is I would have agents who had never even written a deal yet. They're brand new agents. So we would go through the whole process of writing an offer, pretending, you know, we'd have a seller and a buyer, we'd have the listing agent and the selling agent, and we'd do these mock offers and role playing. You can do the same thing with your real estate agent if they're prepared and willing to give you the time to do that. If you have no deal, no offer to be made, at the very minimum, sit with your agent and walk through the entire offer process. Ask for a blank purchase and sale agreement so you can read it and become familiar with it. Ask for a list of some of the conditions that you can potentially be inserting into your deals so that you can see and understand them ahead of time. All right, and that's going to be bringing us up to Module 7, which is the last module for the online training program. And this is where you now own the property. Now what? And we'll be talking about the transition year and property management. So once again, if you have any questions or concerns, you can either contact Jen at tech support at info@arcawealthacademy.com, or for myself, if you have any questions about the program, please feel free to contact me at apartmentwealthgeneration@gmail.com. And look forward to seeing you on the next webinar or next module.